Okay, so can I tell you guys that I have been looking forward to this pod, and I look forward to all my pods, right? Some of my children, you know what? There's some children I don't like, but this pod I was looking forward to, and initially I was like, "This is gonna be great. We're gonna talk about Gladiator 2. I'm so excited to see this movie," and then I saw the movie, and immediately started texting Sarah from the cab of my truck in Pueblo, Colorado, going, "Oh my god, what just happened?" So I am so excited. I've been thinking about it in terms of this way, right? This has been a very rough month for my family. My mom's dog died. My brother is back in rehab. And worse than anything else, I had to watch Gladiator 2. So this sets the tone for where we're at.
Thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers.
Yeah.
I know. I'll survive. Like somehow. Right, we'll get on. Do you guys, this is our first time talking, the three of us. I'm so excited to talk to you guys. You guys want to introduce yourselves? Brett, you were here first. You want to say hi and tell us who you are, where you're from,
Yeah.
what you're doing?
I'm doing a podcast. I'm Bret Devereaux. I am a teaching assistant professor at North Carolina State University. I specialize in the Roman army, particularly in the Republic, but more broadly, I also blog online at a collection of unmitigated pedantry, acoup.blog.
And Dr. Bond?
I'm Sarah Bond. I am associate professor of history. I have a fancy chair name, but it's Holtzmark Chair of Classics at the University of Iowa. And I, in reality, just teach a lot of ancient history class at the University of Iowa. I live in Iowa City. I have two little kiddos, and I am an expert in Roman law and epigraphy that is specifically looking at marginalized people within the Roman Empire. So I write a lot about artisans and craftspeople and their collectives that are called collegia.
I am so excited to talk to you. Actually, Sarah should tell you. One of my best friends is from Iowa City. I've been through Iowa City a lot. I love that town, like so
It's a
freaking
great town.
much. It's like
Yeah,
this
so
perfect
many
college
writers
town.
get thrown out of bars here. I mean, that's what we are known for is the writers workshop. And like if you want to know every single place that a famous writer has been thrown out of a bar for getting too drunk, I have a tour guide for you because we are a UNESCO City of Literature and that means that we have a lot of fiction writers and poets that cannot handle their alcohol as well.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Well.
Wow, it's like Iowa City and Key West of the two places that I'm thinking of now. Well, Hemingway. I
yeah.
went to
Well,
the
Hunter S.
bookstore.
Thompson very famously got thrown out of a bar in Iowa City when he was here visiting and giving a talk. So we think of this as a badge of honor.
You know what? I followed Hunter S. Thompson. I too am from Kentucky. I am also living in Colorado, like Hunter S. Thompson. I'm gonna stop there. That's as close as to Thompson as I've never been thrown out of a bar in Iowa City, but give it time, I
Well,
guess.
my
I
husband
know.
is a former
I,
bartender, and if you come and visit, we will just practice. We'll just
throwing you
we'll
out of
do
bars. Yeah. No. It's
no,
important.
well, first you can give a talk, and then after that talk, we will go to a dive bar called the Foxhead that he used to be a bartender at, and then we'll throw you out of it because that's the writer's workshop bar. Yeah.
Oh, can we take HATM on the road in the spring or next fall? Let's just do it. I'm in. I'll come talk to some students. All right, let's talk about Gladiator 2. Let's Brett's like, I don't know if Brett's gonna make it through this one.
Well, right now
Let's
my
talk about
cat
Gladiator
has
2.
decided to join us, so I don't know if the camera's catching him, but he has just decided that he's going to be a part of this because
Well, I
I'm
probably heard the
recording from
Hemingway
home.
reference.
Yeah. So hi,
My cat
Percy.
and dog are around here somewhere. All right, before we get into Gladiator 2, let's talk about the first Gladiator. 24 years ago, this film comes out, the Russell Crowe film. Before we start talking about the second film, can we talk a little bit quickly about your first impressions when the first time you saw Gladiator as scholars of Roman history? Maybe your thoughts on the general effect that, did it have like an Indiana Jones-esque effect? Like how when Indiana Jones came out, a lot of people got really excited and really into archaeology. Maybe for the wrong reasons, but at least it introduced them to the ideas, right? Um, what happened with Gladiator? Is Gladiator a film that we like as scholars?
I mean, it's a really good film as a film. Obviously, the
Sure.
history in the first Gladiator can be a little bit dodgy. I think that the opening battle scene in the first Gladiator is pretty formative with how the public understands the Roman army, for better and for worse. I mean, I was, God help me, 15 when that movie came out, so that was in the mix long before I was doing serious study of the Roman world. I think, obviously Gladiator heavily fictional, but the first film, I think, at least has the advantage that it is tapping into some of the themes in how Commodus is presented in our sources in a way that I think we'll get to. Like the second film does not it at all, um, and so there's just a little more substance there, even if the costuming is a little crazy and the everything else is a little crazy. Gladiator also just has the advantage of being an actually very good movie. Like it is a solid, emotionally moving and affecting story. Uh, the second one, not so much. I'm giving away my opinion of the movie a little bit
Oh,
here.
I listen, when you read the title of this podcast, which is already out there, it's literally says we watched Gladiator 2, so you don't have to. So it's okay. Sarah?
Yeah, I think that Gladiator 1 was an incredibly important movie for me because I had taken Latin since I was 14. I was born in 1982 in Roanoke, Virginia. And I won't take you through my entire childhood as I recount this, but what I'm saying is that I went to my first year of college in the year 2001, and then a few weeks later, September 11th happened. And Gladiator 1 had come out in 2000, and I had seen it as a senior in high school. And as Monica Serino has written about frequently, Gladiator 1 brought back sword and sandal films, but also gave us a reflection of America from the late 90s. Because I lived through all of the Clinton administration, and there was a disenchantment with America, with morality, with effective governance. And even though I voted in my very first election on my birthday for Al Gore, I and was very disappointed. I still believed in American democracy, and I still very much believed in the dream that we see in Gladiator 1, this idea that we could have a republic, this idea that we could have effective governance, and that it takes someone selfless, who is our hero Maximus, to bring America back to its greatness. And even though that is a completely fictional idea that Maximus ever lived, because of course he is fictional, and Marcus Aurelius at no point ever indicates that he wants to bring back the republic, even though those ideas were both patently false, I felt like it made for an amazing story, and one that I have now seen upwards of about 35 times, because I have my students review it almost every year when I teach my Roman history survey. And I've even interviewed the historical advisor for the film, Kathleen Coleman, at Harvard. So, I mean, I deeply love Gladiator 1. So, what we are about to say in our review of Gladiator 2 is nothing about the first film. I mean, I wanted to like this. I wanted to go into this movie adoring it, and I just couldn't. So,
Yeah, I was super. I don't know. Like you guys, I love Gladiator for a lot of different reasons, right? And again, when we get into like a history film, we often talk about these ideas, and I always push back against this idea of what my friend Waitman Bourne calls rivet counting, right? Oh, there
Mm.
were so many divisions
oh,
in this fight.
Bateman
Like,
Bourne is your friend?
yeah, I know him. So
Bateman is one of my best friends. How come you did
I was
not
he
gonna
know
was just
say.
on the he was just on the pod at 2 a.m. this morning, England time.
Oh wow.
Like I just talked to Wait
Well,
about
Bateman
12
and I
hours ago.
go way back, way back. We're all Tar Heels here, so
Yeah.
you
I
know.
I know that like
I was there from Waitman's very first day at graduate school.
Oh
well,
wow.
let me tell you about Wait because he coined this term called rivet counting, right? For, at least on the pod, right? And the idea is like we're not interested in that on this podcast because like movies are not documentaries.
Right.
They're not supposed to be an accurate retelling. So Gladiator, like you're saying, Sarah, one of the strengths is that it's kind of using history to maybe tell some other stories, right? In this case, really about America, right, in a lot of different ways. About some, you can obviously take some stuff away from Rome as well, especially if it's curated by somebody who knows something about Roman history. So there's a point to Gladiator. Gladiator has a reason to exist. And now we're going to talk about Gladiator 2. Okay, well, let's do this. Let's not ruin the film yet. So if you're still listening, we're not going to ruin the film just yet. We will get into the spoilers and talk specifically about the things that happen in the film in just a moment. But before we do that, if you are still considering going to see the film, and you might not after we get done, we're going to pause for a second and give a spoiler-free, at least some thoughts on the film, but also maybe some points on like who are these guys, Macrinus and some of these other people who should have lived, did live, but whatever. So let's do that. General impressions, Brett, of Gladiator 2. Spoiler free at first, please.
Yeah. So like Gladiator 2 is a movie that doesn't have a particular reverence for Roman history. It reserves all of its reverence for Gladiator 1 to the point of building a literal altar to it in the film, which was
Thank
I
you.
thought was a little on the nose. But I think it's as a film weaker for it. It lacks the tight narrative of the first film. It lacks the emotional punch. They've dialed up the spectacle using CGI, but as with many practical to CGI jumps, I feel like it ends up having less impact, and the whole is weaker than the sum of its parts, despite valiant efforts by the actors to do what they could with what they were given.
I would agree with that assessment completely. I think that a lot of the story is just not giving a lot of cohesion. And part of the beauty, but also the simplicity of the first movie was that it was very easy to follow it in this hero's kind of journey. And I don't really love the hero's journey, but it underpins most of the most successful movie plots since about 2001: A Space Odyssey. And
Mhm.
so we have Maximus going out there being the reluctant hero, and then ultimately rising up to try and save his community before wanting to return home to Spain, etc. We could all follow that very easily. But with this movie, I definitely needed a flowchart to follow a lot of the characters and their motivations. And the only one that really seems to get a full narrative arc and characterization is Lucius, when in fact there are some very important people that we would like to get to know better and to see in a much fuller in the round kind of characterization like Gaeta and Caracalla, so that we don't fully understand them the way that we understood the pain of Commodus. You know, when
Hmm.
Commodus is crying as he's suffocating his father in the first film, we understood that he wanted to be the favorite of his father. But we don't even see any of the family of Gaeta and Caracalla. We don't understand this dynasty. We don't understand the motivations behind it. And so the stakes are not clear to us in terms of the current administration in the way that was in the first film. So there's so many little things to say, but ultimately, I just wanted characters that were less flat and not just the long suffering Lucius, who we know from the jump, okay, who he really is.
Right.
Yeah, and I've got thoughts on the Lucius thing a little bit in a bit. Absolutely. This film opens up 18 years, 16 years later, I think, after 16, 18 years after the
I mean, they
conclusion
can't
of
really
Gladiator, right?
decide.
Yeah, it's a little weird.
The chronology
Um,
does not work.
Not quite. And again, I'm certainly no Roman expert, but I was kind of playing around online going, "Oh, you took this from this person from here. Okay, okay, we're just going to put some people here in this movie." But I do want to at least want to give a starter pack for people who are interested in this film, because so that there is some context about who Gaeta is, who Caracar are, and so forth. So can we little bit do that? Can we talk first about the twin emperors and who they were in real life and kind of talk about that first?
Yeah. Not twins, for one.
Can I just say,
Uh,
as a twin, They're not twins. Yeah, let's say that as the first thing. As a real twin, I was offended by that.
Yeah, no, they're born about a year apart.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess,
So they're
uh,
Irish twins, basically? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think obviously we have to place the Severan dynasty. Septimius Severus is the military governor of Upper Pannonia when he marches on the capital in the sort of insanity that follows the death of Commodus. Um, and he, uh, you know, uh, Severus he is the sort of first and prototypical of these soldier emperors that we're going to see more and more of over the rest of the third century. Um, he doesn't spend a lot of time in Rome. He tends to be out on campaign a fair bit. He tends to bring his sons with him when he does this, so they don't spend a lot of time in Rome either. The men in this family tend to be very sort of militarily pitched. And I think the other thing that you just have to note at the jump about the Severans is the significance of the women in the Severan dynasty, who are just wholly absent from this film. My God, justice for Julia Domna. Um, Septimius Severus's wife is a major figure in both his administration and also in Caracalla's administration. And through the rest of the dynasty, the mothers and grandmothers of these emperors are very major figures. Um, Often, in part, and this is particularly true for the reign of Caracalla, that Caracalla doesn't seem to have been super interested in domestic administration. He prefers to be with his army. And so Julia Domna seems to have handled a lot of that, which made her, a very, very important figure. Um, and so I think you have the sort of the Severan dynasty, this kind of contrast between, at least for the early Severans, the military men on the one hand, and the women as the administrators and power brokers behind the scene, which makes this dynasty a sort of wonderfully complex creature, which in no way appears in this film.
Yes, to give Gaeta and Caracalla that kind of casting, which really is trying to take the reputation from a man named Cassius Dio, who is a Roman historian, his characterization, particularly of the next Severan emperor, whose name Elagabalus. This is essentially being cast backwards onto Gaeta and Caracalla in many ways, especially this use of makeup and the feminizing, orientalizing of Gaeta and Caracalla. That's taking a lot of allegations from Dio and putting them onto Gaeta and Caracalla, when in fact they were very different people than Elagabalus. And I think that it does them an injustice not to actually talk about their policies, to show their mother, to show the death of their own father, because at the death of Septimius Severus, we are told that he says, all I want you to do is pay the troops and get along. And then Caracalla has Gaeta killed. Like, this is
Promptly murders
classic
his
from the
brother.
first. Then he murders his brother right after his dad tells him not to. And so, we could have had that
In their
same,
mother's arms, we are told.
right? We could have had the same emotion that we had from the first movie of Commodus being let down by his father and not fulfilling all of the things that Marcus Aurelius wanted. We could have had a bedside scene of Septimius Severus dying and us understanding the psyches of Caracalla and Gaeta, but instead they chose to just cast them as like early 20-year-olds perhaps that just love luxury and killing people and pet monkeys.
Which the luxury thing is ironic because the one thing we're told about Caracalla is this is a guy who is more comfortable in an army camp and lives with and like his soldiers. He is for all of his foibles, like this is a guy who likes his military bread, which he's not in the lap of luxury. Also, I guess we should probably say something about the origin of this family and the casting. The Severans are um, Septimius Severus is of North African extraction. He has both, at least as he represents it, both Punic and Libyan heritage. The other wing of the family is of Syrian and Levantine extraction. So this is a family that is, from the Levant and North Africa. And of course, the decision to cast pale redheads to play the role is sort of um, striking. I'm going to go with striking here. Um, and really, I thought a touch unfortunate. Yeah, I mean, the characters in the film are a mash together of Elagabalus and like the popular conception of Caligula as to sort of what they're driving at. And that has, we don't get a lot of characterization of Gita in the sources at all, but it has, I mean, we get some, but it has nothing to do with them. Like, that's not the problem. And I actually, in a way, I was really disappointed because I think there's an interesting story to tell about the way that Caracalla's reign fails, in that he is too much the military man. Caracalla is almost what you get if you make Maximus emperor, and it turns out it doesn't work well.
Ooh,
And you could have told that story, and they didn't. They told a completely
that
different and
makes
worse
that
story.
almost makes sense. Like it's like what they're building towards in the first Gladiator, and then you're like, well, wait, that
It's
doesn't work
bad,
either.
actually. I mean, Maximus as a fictionalized Septimius Severus works almost perfectly because like Maximus has to be a legatus Augusti pro praetore somewhere. Upper Pannonia would make sense for him to be leading that army in the opening. Like he is Septimius Severus. Like Maximus is a sort of Septimius Severus like. And so the idea is like, yeah, you've managed to put Maximus in charge. It turns out that fixes nothing about the problems with the system, and in fact makes things much, much worse.
Isn't that almost like, again, going back to this allegory that Sarah was talking about with the first Gladiator film about trying to fix America? This idea of taking somebody from the outside, someone who's not a Washington insider, to fix it. Turns out that doesn't actually work either. Like
No, it does not.
that's actually a dream of Rome. What
It
about
turns out you
Macrinus?
can't fix systemic problems by simply changing the guy running the system. Who knew?
What's the point of history? Um, a lot was made out of Denzel coming into this film.
He's
When
certainly
they
having fun.
announced Denzel, oh boy, Denzel's having a lot of fun in this movie. I remember when they cast it, I was like, oh wait, I almost thought, is Denzel too big for Gladiator 2? You know, when Crow was cast, this was the movie that really solidified Crow, and Crow goes on this run, really from maybe LA Confidential through, all the way through a bunch of films. But this was the one, for a short time, Crow was the guy in Hollywood. And you could talk about Hollywood through this film. Denzel is already Denzel. Denzel's been Denzel for like 30 years. I didn't know I'd never heard of this character, Macrinus. Can we talk a little bit about who the real Macrinus was?
Sure. I can say a little bit about him. And I just want to say that sometimes pronunciations of Latin can vary because we don't know exactly how it was spoken today. So sometimes people say Severin, sometimes people say Severin. You can have a long I with Macrinus, or you can have Macrinus. It's fine. It is all acceptable and okay. And Macrinus, what we know, he is absolutely a usurper. He is from the area of Mauritania. He is from a very wealthy equestrian background. And so his family is actually extremely established when he eventually becomes a praetorian prefect. Geta is already very much dead when Macrinus comes to the floor and actually is going to overthrow Caracalla. Because this is not going to be until 217 to 218 that Macrinus is going to have a very short rule. And so I too was very heartened by the casting of Denzel Washington as someone who is African, because Macrinus is himself from Africa, but it just doesn't make sense that the individual that you cast of color is the one African who is actually, has a darker skin tone than everybody else, who is African American in reality and gets to use his New York accent, whereas the Africans on the throne That is to say, they're quasi-Africans. Their father is
Mhm.
from Leptis Magna, and their mother is Syrian, as Bret has already talked about. So the fact that we have the brothers being lily white redheads who are also partially African, but Denzel Washington, who is black, who is now trying to be a usurper, who is, this is this idea of Africa that it's rebellious and it's not part of the empire, when in fact the lands that we are talking about throughout have been part of the Roman Empire since the Punic Wars. I mean, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of years that Africa Proconsularis and Numidia have been a part of the Roman Empire, and yet in this movie Africa is cast like some rebel group that is on the fringes of the empire. It's the second wealthiest province that we
Right.
have. I mean, come on. Like, Africa is not the outsider, it's the insider by this
Right.
point.
Right.
Okay. And so
Very much.
casting Denzel as Macrinus, this barbarian who is from far away lands, only to find out later various things about his background. All of that is unfortunate, because I think they had a real opportunity to address the fact that Africa is a large part of the Roman aristocracy by this point.
Yeah. I also, if I can say, I found the decision to frame him as a sort of very much a self-made man from the underclass. I don't want to give away too much this early, but but very much that framing. And I'm like, that's a little weird because it's like Macrinus is from a very well-heeled equestrian family. They've been citizens a while. He like the Praetorian prefecture, at this point is a largely administrative job. It's usually handled by jurists. Like he has come up through the law and the civil administration. In the end, he pulls off what is essentially kind of a military coup. Um, but that's not the direction he comes from, and like they opt to sort of read him as like, here is the self-made, somewhat slimy businessman, and I'm like, that's just a weird pitch for this figure, and it taps into the ethnic dynamics that the film has going in ways that I found both ahistorical and also upsetting.
Yeah, it sounds to me, guys, that what you're telling me here is that we've got a bunch of people name dropped in this film who did exist, and that we should not, in any circumstance, consider what we see on screen to be anywhere close to accurate depictions of said
No,
human beings. Is that
no,
fair?
not even a little bit. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, can I add one more thing to catch us up here? I just want to note, when we go back to Commodus's death, okay, so Commodus, when he dies in 192, his sister, Lucilla, whatever you want to call her, she's been dead for 10 years because Commodus killed her. Okay, she's dead in
Oh,
182.
oh man.
She's
Yeah,
dead.
she is
She's
still kicking around in this movie somehow.
she's still in this movie. I'm like, this girl has survived it all. But I just want to note that in reality, she has been dead since 182, which is just 2 years after Marcus Aurelius died, and it's only a couple of years into Commodus's reign. And so, seeing her kicking around in the Severan age is not something that is real.
Well, it just changes my impression of this film entirely.
I
um,
know.
I had a
Supposed to be
dream of Gladiator 2.
our mama bear, our person who brings Marcus Aurelius's memory forward, because we get
Oh
at
yeah.
least 25 shots of Marcus Aurelius as a bust. But
Yeah,
Well,
and we get quotations from the meditations and stuff like that. But his daughter has been dead for a long time now.
yeah.
all right. Well, that leads me into Sarah, where I want to go next, which is there's another character in this film that we never see alive, but gets name dropped more than anyone else in this film, and it's Marcus Aurelius. This film is like the dream of Marcus Aurelius. It's all we hear about for 2.5 hours. Is there was a dream of Rome? There's Marcus Aurelius, Marcus Aurelius, blah 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 blah. So can we quickly talk both about who Marcus Aurelius actually was, whether or not he really dreamed of having a republic again, and how much Sarah loves broicism. And that'll take us through the next 6 hours. But can we talk a little? Can we do some myth busting on Marcus Aurelius real quick?
Yeah,
Sarah, this is all
let's
you.
talk a little bit about Marcus Aurelius. I need to just say that my medieval Latin professor wrote a very wonderful translation of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. So I'll just plug it and say the best thing about Marcus Aurelius is the translation of his Meditations by Greg Hayes. And so I have read it very fully back and forth. But the thing that bothers me is that technocrats today, like especially Mark Zuckerberg, but also Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, they love to quote Stoicism, and they like to get little quotations of Stoicism in their email inbox in the mornings.
Mhm.
Like, they get little quotations from Seneca, little quotations from Marcus Aurelius, and then they go about their days feeling as though everybody has a place in the world, and I was born to do what I have done, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. And the thing is that Stoicism tends to confirm the status quo. If you are born a slave, you should be the best slave you could be. If you're born a Roman emperor, just be the best just emperor you could ever be. And it's easy to say that when you are born an emperor, and not easy to say it when you are born a slave. Being happy with your lot in life is something that technocrats live off of because they want us to be happy serving their billions of dollars. They want us to conform. And so Stoicism as a philosophy is very much tech friendly and billionaire friendly. And the quotation of things like Virgil, we already saw the quotation of Virgil by people like Matt Damon in the commercial for his Bitcoin hustle, right? He quoted Virgil, he tried to justify this view of Rome. And so the use of Roman literature and philosophy to justify hustles like Bitcoin and like various other technology enterprises today is not surprising. But I felt like this movie fell into the hero worship and the kind of hagiography for Marcus Aurelius that I wasn't into, because in reality, Marcus Aurelius always lifted up his son Commodus as his later co-emperor, and always wanted to hand over the empire to an unfitting son. He broke with the adoption succession of the 2nd century, and he put an unfit son on the throne for biological succession purposes for the first time since the end of the Flavian dynasty, for the first
98.
time since we had Domitian come to power. So why did he do that if he truly believed in the dream of Rome, was to put his own son back on the throne rather than adopting one that was fit to rule?
I just feel like there's a book here waiting to be written called Marcus Aurelius Was Really an Asshole. I just...
Yeah. It will be an edited volume, and it will have,
many contributors.
Yeah, Joel Christensen has written very well on what we call broicism. And Joel is an actual Greek philosophy expert. And so I would encourage you guys to go and root that out a little bit. But it's upsetting to me when people use the quotation of the ancient world as a profound way of justifying their behavior today.
I think it's worth probably also noting like the context of Stoicism as a philosophy, both the context of its emergence and the context where it catches on in the Roman world, because it's a Greek philosophical school, that in both cases, Stoicism is a philosophy of consolation for a people who have lost their liberty. This is a philosophy that emerges and grows popular. It's like, how do you make peace with a world that is no longer under your control? Like, yeah, Socrates and Cicero can talk ethics, but you are ruled by a distant king or emperor, and ethics has nothing to do with that. How do you cope? And it's really weird to see that philosophy presented as a philosophy of governance and rule when, I mean, at least theoretically, we still have a republic. We still are the steersman of our own destiny. And Stoicism is a philosophy for when you have no control. And I find that I find that very odd. I may be a little more sympathetic with both Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism, but it's a weird fit for like this moment. Um, and and also those atomized quotes invariably, like, Stoicism is a big complex philosophic system, and you get these little atomized, like, inspirational quotes which do not capture the complexity of the thing at all.
Yeah, you know,
Either its merits or its very significant flaws that Sarah is quite right in outlining. Like, her critique is correct.
Stoicism is Instagram ready. You know,
Yeah.
it's you see it on you see it on Instagram Reels, and there's always somebody, Ryan Holiday, and these people I follow. Like as you were talking, like Gary John Bishop, a guy I follow, just popped up like on my phone going blah 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 blah, because I find it fascinating that these, like, I follow all these people that I like to say, what are you talking about, right? And it's just like these quick little snippets that you can take entirely out of context because they sound great, and then you put Epictetus beside the name or beside the quote, and you
Of
go,
course.
oh,
Right? I mean, fortune favors the bold, Jason. Like, we have
oh.
to go forward with our Virgilian quotations, but also our quotations of Tacitus and
Hmm.
Seneca. So it wasn't just quotations of Marcus Aurelius, but it was also, there was a Tacitus quote paraphrase at the very beginning that was saying, oh, Rome takes a desert and calls it peace. And
Hmm.
so immediately I tagged that they were trying to thread in some other Roman historians in quotations as well. But here's the thing is that that doesn't make you a profound person. Oscar Wilde said this about quotation, is that using quotation for your own eloquence is, a lazy man's venture. And I think that they're filling in the plot holes with various quotes from Marcus Aurelius and other writers because they themselves don't have the same eloquence of the first movie. And I think they're using quotation as a bit of a crutch, but also they're trying to create continuity with the first movie, and it's just too much. I don't need to see another bust of Marcus Aurelius being touched softly by
But
hands.
the
I
beard is
mean,
great. So nice.
stroking the beard of Marcus Aurelius doesn't make me long for him to come back.
Can I tell you before we move on to the film, the quote I used yesterday? I went to Costco during Thanksgiving week, and my friend Kate Shepard, who's been on the pod a few times, she said, "Jason, are you out of your mind? You went to Costco during Thanksgiving week." And I said, "Kate, the strong do as they may, and the weak
We
suffer as they must." So that, Sarah, just how deep I am as a person, I'm busting out my quotes in terms of you know navigating the bloody waters of Costco. All right, let's get into this film. So if you're listening now, um, pause if you still want to go see this film and you don't want us to ruin it, because we're about to ruin a whole lot of it for you. So or
and
just
then
keep going because
reconsider your
it's
desire to see this film.
you know what, just listen now and then go in just ready for loaded for bear when you watch this with your giant Coke and your popcorn. Let's just keep listening is what I have to say. All right, first we're going to do the nice thing. Brett and Sarah, I'm going to ask you to say something nice about Gladiator 2. What did you like about the film? What were there parts of the film that you liked? And if so, what did you like about the film? What was the film successful in doing?
I felt as though the film was extremely successful in telling me about the hunger within Rome for spectacle and the fact that there were a lot of exotic animals that were brought into the Colosseum at this time. Now, we can talk about what those different animals are and whether they were actually ridden by other gladiators, but I did feel it was an accurate representation of the exotic animal trade, which was heavily used in the late second into the early third century.
Yeah, I think it evokes the the vibe of the spectacle in Rome quite well. I mean, in some ways, it's almost overly fitting that a film about gladiators ends up as an empty CGI filled spectacle with a lot of gore and not a lot of substance. But
Ooh,
but in a
Brett.
way that has some symmetry to it. Um, uh, I suppose this is going to be a little backhanded. some of the military equipment, especially in the earliest scenes, was surprisingly accurate, except for the fact that it was 2 to 3 centuries out of place. Like, there were some where I'm like, "Oh, I know what museum they were looking at that helmet in," but that helmet is a 4th century helmet. BC, 4th century BC helmet. That no one would be wearing at this point. Like, what is that doing there? But, like, neat. I Part of me honestly wonders for the opening battle scene, were they raiding every prop room across Hollywood? Like, it looks like they raided a whole bunch of props from, like, HBO's Rome. Because they just, like, they had a whole
Well,
bunch
the
of,
set
like,
still exists, Brett. The set still exists at Chinachita because I
yeah.
visited it with Jake Batera a few years ago. Like Jake and I
Well, and if
went
they had
to the
used it, then at least they'd have
HBO.
had painted statues and buildings.
I know. That's honestly, I adore HBO Rome. So I do. If we come away with any suggestions from this podcast, I do want to tell people go watch the first 2 seasons of one of the most expensive television shows of all time, HBO Rome, because as I always tell my students, it's not all historically accurate, but it's fun and I have a good time. And one time I was watching it on a plane, and somebody asked me if I was watching porn, and I said, "No, sir. I am watching HBO Rome." Okay? This is not pornography, even though it may be taken as such, but it is a
Yeah.
very good TV show. And the set is still up at Cinecittà, which is outside of the actual city of Rome. It's the last line on the metro. You can just go out there and see that and the Gangs of New York set.
Ooh.
Yeah.
The Gangs of New York
Let's
set is
go
there.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
let's.
in.
Well, because I believe that Francis Ford Coppola and Scorsese, I believe they both filmed there because Fellini very famously had an apartment built into a wall of one of the screens that are there at Cinecittà. Like he lived there part time when he was filming, and so people go there to relive the Fellini-ness of the cinema. And so you can go on a very nice tour. Always take the Italian tour instead of the English one if you can, because it's very fun. But yeah, I think if we ever do a historians at the movies tour, that Brett and I can certainly lead you around Rome to show you where all the props were taken from in the Capitoline Museum, for
Oh
instance.
God, so many.
Can I tell you,
So
we're
many.
actually in talks of doing some stuff like that. We have one planned for Walt Disney World like next year, but that's just because, like, oh yeah, it's happening. Like we're taking this show on the road. It's gonna be cool.
Oh wow.
Oh, I'm a Disney fan. Like, there's so much Disney stuff. Oh, there's Mickey right behind me. Yeah, it's happening. All right, let's talk about this movie. Brett and Sarah,
Mhm.
fire away. What's
Okay,
your beef
let's
with this
talk.
film?
Well, let's talk about the very beginning, and I would love to hear Brett's reaction to hearing about Numidians rebelling in the year two. It's right. It can't decide exactly. It says 16
Yeah.
years after the death of Commodus, so it should actually be 208. But then we fast forward by the time we get to Rome to 211. So I'm guessing that the rebellion is 208 that they are placing. But why in the world are we in Numidia
But then
and
they
Lucius?
have a title card that reads 200.
But they said 16 years after the
I
death
know.
of Commodus,
I
which is
know. I know.
292. So I was adding it up in my head like you guys may have said this, but you said
And we have a
16 years
Roman
after.
fleet invading North Africa, so apparently it's 200 BC. Who knew?
Yeah, so I mean, Brett, do you want to talk a little bit about whether there was actually a rebellion at this time and the actual place of Numidia, which had been created as a province by Septimius Severus as its own separate province from Africa in the year 198 CE? So it is
Yeah.
a province. It is already part of the Roman Empire, but had been for many years, and now it's its own separate province.
Right. And yeah, incorporated directly into the core of Numidia is incorporated directly into Africa Nova in 46 BC. This is an area that has been under direct Roman rule for a long time. Numidia, prior to that, was an independent kingdom, occasionally a cluster of them, depending on how much the royal family was murdering itself, which had been a Roman client state since Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus's campaigns in North Africa at the end of the Second Punic War, so 204 to 202. So this is an area that has been in the Roman sphere of influence for 4 centuries by the time this movie is supposed to take place. So, they present it as if this is an area sort of being ravenously conquered by the ever-expanding Roman Empire, which is both not North Africa, which has been a long-standing part of the Roman Empire, but also not the nature of the Roman Empire in this period. This is a Roman Empire that hasn't undergone really meaningful expansion since the reign of the Emperor Trajan. And even that, I mean, that's Dacia. It's not a lot. Um, you know, occasionally emperors will do campaigns against the Parthians in the east. They rarely achieve much. This is a Roman Empire that has been largely static on its borders for nearly 2 centuries. It's not an expanding sort of ravenous power. This is the stately, somewhat staid, somewhat crusty Roman Empire. And so we sort of start with this big Roman assault, and I'm like, what are we doing here? The military historian in me was made deeply sad by the opening battle scene, which makes just no sense for how the Romans would have attacked a walled city. Um, I realized that every director watched Saving Private Ryan, and they watched the opening scene, and they wanted to do their Omaha Beach thing forever. But opposed landings do not happen in the ancient world. The thing is, your boats are faster than their troops. So if they're lined up on the beach, you just sail to a different beach. This is especially true if they are a city, the cities are not in the habit of moving. And so you would just land upspin, and then you'd march on the city. Likewise, the Roman assault is this like big, catastrophic, single storming event. That is not how the Romans take walled cities. The Romans are very methodical in how they approach walled cities. So you're gonna move in, you're gonna build a fortified camp, then you're gonna build a ring of defenses around the city to wall them in, then a ring of defenses around those to wall everybody else out. You're gonna degrade the defenses, and then usually the culmination of a Roman siege is building a big old ramp up the wall so that you can just roll the army in. And instead, we get a lot of like fire catapults from ships. The Romans do have incendiary missiles, but they do not have napalm.
Oh,
Yeah,
You gotta
which is
wait for Byzantine fire to get
yeah, no,
anything
yeah,
that is
and
going to rival that. So hold for the
yeah,
Byzantines.
yeah. If this was a Byzantine fleet, we could have some pyrotechnics. But Ridley Scott loves his fire arrows. He loved them in the first Gladiator movie too. That's not how they work. Roman incendiary stuff is designed to cause little fires inside of a city so that your enemy has to go put them out. They're not for lighting the enemy on fire. That's not how they work, because your incendiary is like olive oil and pitch and tar. It's not going to explode. It's not going to light a person on fire. People are mostly made of water, quite famously. And so, you get this big scene. The Romans show up with a big fleet. The ships are weird in 2 different directions. They're big, huge honking warships, which by this point, the Romans haven't used warships like that in 2 centuries. Rome controls the entire Mediterranean littoral. There's no navy for them to fight. So the Roman navy in this period consists almost entirely of these smaller coastal patrol ships called Liburnians. So they don't have the big, huge honking warships. And I know we don't want to get too into rivet counting, but also as recreations of like Second or First Punic War era Roman warships, these are not great. And also the city's fortifications are really weird. They've got like projecting towers on the coastline and like a double wall, but it's a double wall at the same height connected, which is not how a double wall works. For a really well-defended ancient city, you would have a primary wall and then a second wall outside of it. But that second wall is much lower so that you can shoot over it. It doesn't offer cover for the enemy. And the goal is it makes it hard for them to target the base of your wall with catapults. Like that's what it's for. Disrupts approaches, things like that. So,
Like
yeah,
Constantinople, guys. Think of
yeah,
Constantinople and the Theodosian walls
yeah.
in
Which
your
is which
minds
is a
as
triple
you
wall
are yeah.
because it's awesome. Yeah, no, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. And this didn't look right. It isn't set up right. And the Numidian defenders, for some bizarre reason, all of their equipment is from like the Middle Republic stroke the Hellenistic period. It's like a hodgepodge of stuff from about 200 BC. And I was really confused by that. Our hero Lucius puts on what I assume is supposed to be a linothorax, although it seems to be made of the wrong material. Nobody's using that armor by this point. One
Should
of the
we
guys,
explain what the linothorax is since Greg Aldrete is not here, but we
oh
need
yeah,
to give him
is
his
not here to
flowers.
do it. Linothorax is a layered textile armor used by the Greeks as a cheaper alternative to bronze breastplates. They're pretty effective. They're quite stiff. There is continued scholarly argument as to whether they were laminated or constructed otherwise. The laminated reconstruction is the one that works. That's Greg Aldreti's argument. But this is an armor. The Romans never really adopt this armor, and so as Rome expands, we see less and less and less and less of it. And by this point, by 200 AD, it's been an extinct armor type for almost 2 centuries. We don't see this. The Romans instead prefer mail armor, scale armor, and then later, what is in ample evidence in the film, the iconic lorica segmentata, this segmented sort of plate armor that the Romans do use, that we saw a lot in the first Gladiator movie, which that's a period correct armor. Mail is also, like the nerd in me, mail is period correct. You would have seen a lot of Roman soldiers wearing mail, or you might say chainmail armor. But for some reason, all of the sets that they get in this movie have what we call shoulder doubling. They have these shoulder pads. That is how mail was worn in the Republic. By the early imperial period, those shoulder pads have dropped away. So nobody would have had shoulder doubling in that style again for 150 years at least. So it's a
But
anachronism stew.
yeah, can we talk a little bit about the fact that all of this is trying to set us up for a love story that means almost nothing, but
Right.
just like any good Disney movie, you need to have a loss of some sort, and either you're going to lose a romantic partner or you are going to lose a parent so that we can connect with you through grief. Okay,
Right.
so just like with Maximus and the touching of the grain 5 million times during the first movie, we have Lucius falling in love, and he is married to or partnered with a woman who is from this native Numidian town. In reality, she is a very well known Palestinian Egyptian actress whose most of her roles were cut out of the entirety of the movie, but she gets a little bit of a brief role within the very beginning of this movie. And her whole purpose is essentially just to die so that Lucius hates Rome even more than he already hated Rome, even though deep inside himself, Lucius knows he is a Roman and he can quote from various pieces of literature, but he is very bitter. And so we have to understand this bitterness through grief in the same way we did with the first movie. But we just met this guy 2 minutes ago. We have no real connection to him or his love story. We didn't see it develop. And suddenly she's dead like 5 minutes into the movie. And so I think that it's really difficult to connect with Lucius because we don't know him, but it all sets the scene for Marcus Acacius coming in, and suddenly Pedro Pascal is there. And I love Pedro Pascal. I love The Mandalorian, even though we don't really get to see his face very often. But I loved having Pedro Pascal show up. But his whole reason for this rebellion is to say, I'm just an unwilling general. I just hate killing all these people. I wish
I'm so
I wish I
tired.
didn't have to kill all these people. And so what we have in the first 5 or 6 minutes are just all of these feelings, but we don't have a lot of investment in character development, and so we can't get fully attached to them yet. And that's kind of a problem throughout the movie.
Yeah. No, we never really get attached to the characters. And also, the first Gladiator movie did this sort of reluctant Roman general thing, and this film leans on it too. And the historian in me, like, there are no reluctant Roman generals. So the kind of guy that's leading a Roman army, right? He's a senator. He has come up through a career path where he is preparing himself for this kind of command. This is the goal. Like, and there is both no Maximus in the first film esque, like, I'm going to retire to my farm. No, you're a career politician, and
Yes,
and
but we
all
need Cincinnatus, Brett. We need Cincinnatus and the myth of
right,
returning to the farm,
right,
because that is a Midwestern sensibility, but it's also based on the myth of Cincinnatus, who is a general who's called out of retirement and then goes back to
and
the
he goes back.
farm. And so, really, it's a callback to Roman heroes of yore.
But it makes no sense in the imperial period. and
Agreed.
and 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 then, just like, more broadly, I think it cuts to, and I'm sure we'll come back to this. The film wants this distinction, as the first film did, between the corrupt and decadent politicians and the morally pure military men. And I just want to scream, because in Rome, those are the same people. Rome does not have separate political and military aristocracies. It has one aristocracy that does both of these things. And so your corrupt senators, your emperors, and your military men, they are the same men. Septimius Severus is all three of those guys at various points in his career. And so these are not, they're coming from the same guys. And so we repeatedly get this sort of contrast, and Hollywood loves this contrast between the old fogey Roman senators and the principled Roman generals. And they are the same dude. That is, it is the same pic. These are the same picture. The other thing I just wanted to tag: this movie has a really big women in refrigerators problem, where 2/3 of the speaking female characters exist to take arrows in the chest to motivate men.
Yes. I
In the
think that
year
is
of our
very
Lord
true.
2024.
But at the same time, I suspect that part of the reason that they chose North Africa is because that is the same place that they have Maximus go in order to
Mm.
be trained in the first movie. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a location callback to the fact that Maximus also had to go to North Africa and to then become part of his gladiatorial troop. But then we have this scene very quickly of eventually, that he's so distracted by his wife falling from the wall that he is taken captive himself and falls into the water, and then he is transported to become a gladiator, and immediately his gladiatorial school is not far from Rome, within Italy. So his actual gladiatorial training school, unlike Maximus in the first film, is that moves the entire story from North Africa to Rome, because we have
Mm-hmm.
to have an explanation of how Lucius returns back to his homeland. Essentially, this is a bit of a story of him returning back to the place that he was raised, and so we have to figure this out. And in order to do that, we have to be brought to Macrinus / Denzel Washington's gladiatorial school in Italy. So that's kind of where we pick up, and where we are introduced to the gladiatorial training school.
All right, I want to ask you guys about, because I want to talk about Denzel utterly hamming this film up. There was all this talk. Let's talk about Denzel first, and then I want to come back to the relationships between Lucius and his father in this film. But let's go ahead and talk about Denzel. There was all this talk ahead of time, and look, it's usually this time of year people are always pushing for this person, that person, Academy Award winner, whatever. Right? Listen, it ought to be Dune 2 across the board.
Yeah.
Amazing film. At what point in time did you realize that really Macrinus is actually Alonzo Harris from Training Day?
Oh goodness. That thought did
Denzel's
not
awful
occur
in
to me,
this.
but yeah.
Mm. English,
Yeah.
right?
English, yeah.
So weird.
Yeah. 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 I would also say he's also the only character who we get, I think, a relatively like who explains his motivations and his philosophy clearly. Like Gita and Caracalla are just,
Right.
mad emperors. Acacius Pedro Pascal is terribly sad all the time. There are some senators who are doing whatever it is they're doing. Um, and Lucius is emotionally driven, but Macrinus is the character that is actually like, this is my philosophy of what Rome means, what my place is in it, what my aim for the future is, how a person should be. And it's a villainous philosophy, but like it's interesting, at least it's something to grab onto. Whereas at the end of the film, right, like Lucius gets his chance right at the end of the film to be like, here is what I'm on about, and it is a just a giant puff of hot air in the form of a speech that I'm like, these are words, they don't mean anything. We get repeated references to like Marcus Aurelius's dream, the dream that was Rome, whereas the first film was very sure that that meant a republic reborn, as silly as we've discussed. The second film has no idea what it means.
Right.
Nobody knows what it means except for Macrinus, who is sure that it's full of crap. And that made him like by far the most interesting character in the film. Um, but like nobody else is. He has no one to play off of.
Yeah, it feels, Brett, like he's in a different movie than
Yes,
everybody else,
a better movie,
right? It's something. But
a more
it's
fun movie, maybe not a better movie.
it's like he's playing a different melody than the rest of the band or something else like that, right? It's just like it's out of tune with the rest of it. Like if I could just go with that, because look, I love Denzel, right? But this, and I wanted to like, oh sweet, Denzel's in this, and we're gonna, you'd see the shots like, all right, cool. I'm excited because whenever Denzel's on screen, you can't help but just got everything. Good guy, bad guy, whoever. He's Denzel's one of the great actors ever. It was just weird. It was
one thing
just a
one thing I
weird
picked up on the
performance.
scenes, he has a physicality with his costuming and his
Oh, I
robes
was thinking
and a
about that. The way,
presence on the
yeah,
set that nobody else has. And it's one of those things where, I mean, you can tell it's clearly actors' craft because nobody else is getting those directing instructions. Um, but once again, it was like, is this guy in a different movie? Like everybody else is like, I'm standing up and delivering my lines. Like I don't want to harsh on the actors, but it was a very different style of performance where he's playing with his jewelry, he's adjusting his robes, he's moving around the space, moving into other people's spaces in a way that a lot the other characters often weren't. And once again, it felt like he was in a different movie with maybe a different director. It was very strange.
I wonder if this is a case of almost a George Lucasian kind of thing where it's like, well, here's the words, just say them. Because it feels like looking at Ridley Scott's recent films. I was saying this, on Blue Sky. This is the worst film I've seen since Napoleon, and Napoleon was one of the worst movies
Yeah.
I've ever seen. Napoleon was awful, and I look at Ridley Scott's body of work, and I want to like it, but at the same time, the last thing that I think that I really, really enjoyed was 2015 with The Martian. The rest of the films, even The Last Duel, which I thought was creative and historically really interesting. I don't know that Scott's directing anymore.
Yeah, I don't
You
know.
know,
I think he's trying to recapture his himself from 2000 in the same way that this movie is trying to recapture Gladiator from 2000, and that's a little sad to say that this is someone who used to really bring to life a world that was imaginative and evocative and very powerful. And I'm not sure if his most recent movies have ever been able to recapture the magic of Gladiator 1, and that's a very difficult thing to deal with, that perhaps you've crested, perhaps you at this point are not quite the director that you used to be, so it's paralleling the life of the director a little bit, so perhaps that is what's going on.
well, Sarah, can we talk about that? Because I think you're absolutely right. Because here's the other thing that I noticed: this film does not look as good as Gladiator, in my own mind. You look at
No.
the scenes like of the crowd inside the Colosseums. I felt like I was watching A Knight's Tale, which is a fun movie, but it's not a high production film, and it's not particularly visually engaging. I
Yes, so we want to. So one thing I wanted to say about the set in general is that so the Coliseum today holds 50,000. We know that it held 50,000 people thereabouts,
Mhm.
and when we get the set, which most of this film was filmed in Malta, and they used a historical advisor who is well known for giving tour guides in Rome, particularly for famous people who want to learn about gladiators. And so they're really focusing on the Colosseum as Rome, and that's why the set of Rome, you don't see the Forum. You don't see most of the other buildings. The only building of the Forum that we see is towards the end of the film when we see the inside of the Curia Senatus, that is to say, the Roman Senate House. But we really don't explore other areas of Rome except for one senator's house and the Colosseum. And so the Colosseum is Rome, is kind of what we are
Mhm.
being told visually, that the Colosseum is everything that Rome is, right? And Denzel says this actually quite beautifully towards the end. It's like, this is the greatest temple that Rome ever built. And he's talking about the Colosseum. But at the same time, because there's so much focus on one building, there's no grandeur of the city of Rome that had, by this time, it no longer has 1 million people. It has a little bit less than that by that time, because the high point of Rome's population is 1 million. So it's a little bit less than this because we are post a very bad plague in the late second century. But at the same time, I think it's a disservice to have this dusty desert Malta kind of set for Rome, because that's not really what Rome looks like at this time period. And the grandeur of Rome and the majesty is part of how you understand this whole movie. And it just
Mhm.
wasn't there. They didn't spend the money on developing a set.
Yeah. I was struck really early on. We get an establishing shot that is an aerial sweep of Rome that felt like it was the model, but then every other shot is from the perspective of where they have their final confrontation, on this like creek, which I hope to God is not supposed to be the Tiber. Um, but um,
It's like
but
the upper Mississippi.
yeah, it was bizarre to me because Rome is in the distance, and the way they had it is like you could see the Colosseum above the skyline. I'm like, okay, one, the Colosseum is in a valley in Rome, but two, Rome sprawls by this point. Like, I don't know where we're supposed to be, but if we're in visual range of like the Capitoline Hill, this area should be built up. I was trying to figure out like where are we supposed to be in relation to the urban center. This thing should be huge. The not only do you have the sort of large public architecture, right, but the built up area of Rome, it's all insulae, these multi-story apartment buildings that legally were limited in height and everyone ignored it and overbuilt anyway. It's tall, it's dense, the streets are narrow, um, and and somehow this film manages to make Rome feel small and kind of dingy, which is a little weird for Rome in 211 was many things, but the small and dingy was not that.
Yeah, I
It was
mean,
very strange.
Caracalla is about to build a gigantic bathhouse that we have called the Baths of Caracalla that would serve as the model for Grand Central Station in New York City. Like
Right.
the architecture under Caracalla will help to define future American architecture for for many years thereafter. And so the best example of the Baths of Caracalla is actually in John Wick 2 when they go to Rome, and they're all of the scenes at the very beginning when they are going through the initiation, etc., in Rome. That's the Baths of Caracalla, and you can still go there today. And the majesty and the size is only reserved for the Colosseum and not for the rest of the city. And that's a disappointing thing. And as someone who loves the city of Rome even today, I just felt as though it was a disservice to have these fake triumphal gates that weren't really real.
Right.
At the very end of the movie, they had a shot of what looked like the Aurelian Wall, which actually hadn't been built yet.
Yep.
I
Not
mean,
built yet.
they had a small creek that was the Tiber, and Constantine would like a word because the Battle of the Milvian Bridge was much more dramatic than that. And so, yes, it was upsetting because what you need is size to stand in for the magnitude of the Roman Empire. And that's not what we got when we entered Rome. It was very anticlimactic to go through this like dusty road, which I guess was supposed to be the Via Appia, going into Rome. And it's like this is a very different Rome in 211 than it even was in the year 180 when we're introduced to it.
Yeah.
In the first film.
It's thematically a problem too, because this film wants in part to be about it drops this theme a little roughly, but it opens as like this theme is going to be about the city, the great city, it says, is imminently collapsing, right? That's the opening title cards, which no, but also it's supposed to be because they're overextending and conquering, and like this is supposed to be a narrative about like imperialism, and like surely the capital is how you express part of that theme, and they just don't like it's both historically misplaced, but they also like don't do it. And then they just drop that theme like a rock the moment we get to the city of Rome. They're just like, this isn't about imperialism anymore. I'm like, wait, what? Why would you set up all these themes over there? Pedro Pascal was really sad about the imperialism, and we're just not. Oh, we're not doing that anymore. He's been shot a bunch. Okay, all right. I guess this is a different movie now. More people
Brett, is
taking
that
arrows in the chest to motivate the main character. A lot of people do that in this movie. Take arrows in the
yeah, it
chest to
happens.
motivate Lucius. It's always arrows.
Well, I was going to ask you, I mean, as the military historian, if people are really that accurate with a bow, because I have a bow and I am not that accurate, and mine is far more technically. I've got all the bullshit that you get at Bass Pro Shops on mine, and I'm nowhere near as good. Actually, I wonder though, is this more of Scott being kind of heavy-handed? I know that as the two of you are both Roman scholars, you must get tired, I'm assuming, of hearing that America is Rome, and the reason why we're about to fall is because you want to. Sarah just made a face.
I've
Do
been
you want
collecting
to?
these
You want to take
op-eds
this?
for years. I've now got over 73 op-eds that I keep in a little book. And every time someone at the Hoover Institute doesn't have anything to write about for that day, they submit an op-ed called "Are We Rome?" question mark. And I just think it's very unimaginative and not very worthwhile to investigate this anymore. It's just a very tired theme, and we're talking about, if you want to say that the Western Roman Empire falls around 476, let's say, that's still over 260 years after this movie takes place.
Yeah.
Okay? You've still got 260 years to go until the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and the East is going to continue to 1453. So, what are you talking about in terms of like Rome falling during the reigns of Geta and Caracalla? Like, this is just not true. Now you're going to have something called the crisis of the third century that begins in 235. With the last Severan, when he dies, Alexander Severus, you're going to have a period of about 50 years with super high turnover. But then we get Diocletian and we get some more stability thereafter. And so making it seem like we've opened up on the very end of the empire is not very genuine, because there's still a lot of empire to empire left.
Yeah.
And Constantine hasn't even been born or ruled yet for quite a long time, right? So we've cut out a big part of history here, because it takes us back to this idea of Roman history that used to be taught at Cambridge and Oxford, that Roman history ends around 200 CE. And that's not the case anymore. Many of us study late antiquity, myself included, and we go all the way to the year 800. Like, really, I don't stop being a Roman historian until Charlemagne gets crowned, and then I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm out. I'm out.
All right. Yeah. No. And it's also, I think, that framing, like there's Sarah's right about all of these TAM op-eds. There's a facility to them that, like, are we Rome? And invariably it's just this incredibly surface reading that doesn't get into it. And I thought that was actually one of the things that frustrated me with this film. The crisis that is coming is a crisis of central authority, when it seems like every general with an army simultaneously realizes that all it takes to make yourself emperor is an army. And like it I thought it was so striking that the lesson that Scott wants to have, and I think this is really clear in the framing of the movie, is that the solution to Rome's problem is for power to be in the hands of soldiers. Acacius gets this speech, was like, I'm not a politician or an orator, I'm just a soldier. And then Lucius, when he's motivating his guys for the final confrontation, is like, I'm not a general, but we are all soldiers. And then his big speech at the end, he's like, we need to give power back to them. And he gestures at an army. And that is such a weird lesson to take from this period, because the collapse of the civil military relationship, as we would say in like IR land, is the story of the third century, and then the reestablishment of stability under Diocletian with a sort of somewhat different status for the emperor, right? Like being emperor under Diocletian looks a lot different. The problem that sort of puts the exclamation mark at the end of the Severan dynasty is that a lot too much power got given to some soldiers. And so this feels like the weirdest Hoover Institute Are We Rome take I've read, though it does feel like a piece of those takes, which is sort of distressing. Like, all we need is maybe it's appropriate for this year that the movie's verdict is, all we need is a big old strong man to do some violence to get this thing back on track. But I'm like, that is maybe not the takeaway we should have from the third century.
But if we could be kind to people and just say that Ridley Scott knew when he was making this that it is a very precarious time in America. And in times when we don't feel like we have any control, we want prophecy. And
Mm-hmm.
because prophecy is very fraught, some of us may go to psychics, some of us may believe in astrology, but people oftentimes look to history as a way of prophesizing what is to come, in a way that is not usually very helpful. We can learn so many things from history, but it's not a way of tarot carding the future. And so thinking that Rome and America, that Rome is going to provide us some guidance as to how to conduct the future, we can learn that autocracies are bad. We can learn about many things, particularly from the 1930s and 40s, that are recurring because Mussolini believed that he could bring Augustus back and things like this.
Yeah.
But I think that sometimes he is latching on to the public's yearning for what is to come. Like, what's going to happen to us? Like, what is America's future? And that's something that I think about every day too. So I understand the yearning to want to know what will come. But I don't think that Roman historical narratives are going to be the Sibylline prophecies that tell us what will happen. And so we have to look to history for other things rather than simply telling us whether we should have higher immigration policy, because the immigration policy within ancient Rome is not in any way a one-to-one to our current
No.
one today. So understanding the nuances of policy changes and historical detail is very important. But yeah, it's not a treasure map. It's not even a map of how we should proceed forward. So Cullen Murphy wrote probably the definitive book on this, the former editor for The Atlantic, and he wrote a book called Are We Rome? ? And Cullen Murphy is he's a center liberal. I mean, I don't think he's a full conservative, but I think that he was trying to grapple with a lot of the themes when he wrote that book, that so many people write in 1,000 words in the New Republic every single week. And I just think it's time to move forward and away from that.
I want to ask you, as we're kind of coming to a close here, I want to ask you lastly about the relationships between Lucius and Maximus, and maybe Lucilla and Acacius and Maximus. It really bugged me, guys, that they actually made Lucius Maximus's son.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw that coming from very far away, and then I was very
Yeah.
disappointed in it.
Isn't it? Do you feel like it's lazy? I just everyone seems to be so utterly connected in this, and I had a
There's
hard
even
like,
a point. There's a point where
yeah, go
somebody
ahead.
invokes the royal bloodline, and I'm like, one, that's not very Roman, but two, is that really what this movie should be about? And I mean,
No.
they mean it in terms of Lucilla, but like we, the audience, I think, understand it in terms of Maximus, and like either way, I feel like this is lazy.
I just felt it's too coincidental. I think it's much more interesting if this guy is not Maximus's kid, and and there's this ties like he's my father. I'm like, you met the dude for 4 minutes.
Yeah. No, but here's what we need to grapple with now, okay? Is that
Okay.
some of the themes are being borrowed from Christianity in terms of providence and destiny. Okay, so if we understand that it is always Lucius's destiny to achieve this power and to rise up and to be the mix of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher, and then Maximus, the soldier. If we understand it in providential terms, then perhaps it is playing out some sort of destined future that Lucius has always had in his mind and has been set out for him. So I don't know. If you have to take some sort of religious bent to it, perhaps it is the idea of providence being grafted onto this movie.
There is talk, Sarah, of a third film.
Yep.
And that's where this film leads us, right? What happens next?
Well, I hope that if they decide to do that, that they think about the fact that Macrinus is overthrown, and after less than a year of rule. And then we have on the other Syrian line, so we have Julia Domna, who we talked about a little bit, and then her sister has a different line that are predominantly just Syrians, and we have Elagabalus come to power as the next Severan. So it's not as though the overthrow of Macrinus gets rid of any kind of dynasty. The Severans come back, and there's two more of them before the crisis of the 3rd century. So I don't know if they're going to address it, but it would be a great way of addressing some of the very problematic stereotypes of queerness that seem to get
Mhm.
attached to Olga and Caracalla. If I could give one suggestion, and I doubt that he's going to do this because I read an entire article about the kiss that Denzel Washington, the same-sex kiss that he apparently did on set, was immediately cut by Ridley Scott. But if they actually wanted to do something important in the 3rd film, they would try and explore a very nuanced understanding of Elagabalus as a sun priest, as someone who loved both men and women, and was somebody who oftentimes is viewed today as trans. Like, I have very little faith that Ridley Scott will ever do that, but if there is a 3rd one, I would hope that it would go through the nuances of this very important period of Elagabalus in the future. But yeah, I don't have a
Yeah.
lot of faith.
I feel like you could make a really moving, very tragic story about Elagabalus
Yes.
that would be, but yeah, I don't know that I trust this team for that. Can I just briefly launch off on a short rant on the gender politics of this film generally?
I would
Um,
love for you to do that.
so I mean, like I already gestured at being somewhat disquieted by the fact that, you know, 2/3 of the female characters in this film, and the only two major characters, both take an arrow to the chest to motivate the hero. So we've got a women in refrigerators problem from my point of view. But then, yeah, so Gita and Caracalla are at least campy, if not outright queer coded. And the other queer coded character is Macrinus,
Mhm.
in some of the dialogue, evidently toned down. So, meanwhile, our heroic characters, Lucius and Acacius, are explicitly in straight marriages. We're made very clear. And also, Lucius's gladiator best bud, Ravi, we stop to explain that he has a wife off camera over there, totally straight, no homo. And so we've got a story in which all of the heroic characters are buff straight dudes who do violence, and all of the villainous characters are decadent, corrupt, queer coded men, and women exist to die tragically. And it just that gender dynamics in the film was just really bothering me. Um, it's like nonsense from a Roman historical perspective, but it's also just a really troubling way to frame your villains that we're still, again, in like the year of our Lord 2024, that we're still using queer coding to indicate this is a bad guy.
And
Um,
luxury and
yeah,
gold and makeup. It's so orientalized
yeah,
that you could take said theory Said's theory of Orientalism and apply this directly to the film, because everybody who has silk on, everybody who has makeup, everybody who has gold and adopts luxury specifically, they tend to be the ones that are seen as nefarious and evil and perhaps queer. And I don't love at all that Lucilla does get to be very wealthy and have a wealthy house, but she justifies this through saying, "Oh yes, but she is the daughter of Marcus Aurelius, and she wants to bring back the Republic, so it's okay that she's wealthy. It's okay that she comes from this type of family." And then when we go to a senator's house that is indebted to Macrinus, we see the Apollo of the Belvedere, a very famous statue of Apollo that is up in the stairway. And to me, as someone who's written extensively about the use of the Apollo of the Belvedere within white supremacy, I was very upset that particular statue made an appearance in this movie, because it probably meant absolutely nothing to Ridley Scott to have this very famous statue. But this symbol of male beauty and masculinity that was framed in the stairway, to me, and it was completely white, no polychromy in the entirety of the
yeah.
movie. The feminist marginalization combined with the anti-queerness, combined with the whiteness, I just could not like it. And so all of those themes crashed together when I saw the Apollo of the Belvedere, and I realized that this was just not the movie that I wanted it to be. And so yeah, it's most people will not see that sculpture and ever think that, but for me, it represents a wrong turn in how they're using the entirety of the plot and the art within the set.
Yeah, I have to admit, the lack of, I think I mentioned like the lack of polychromy in the statues, in the buildings, and everything was really striking because that's something where the popular depiction of Rome has moved. I think HBO's Rome gets a lot of credit for this, and here it's like, wow, we are back in 2000 and nobody paints anything.
Yeah, Assassin's Creed Odyssey does as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, you're right. You're right. AC Odyssey does a good job of that too. And it was honestly shocking to me to be like, oh, okay, we are back in the sensibility of like 1990s Rome. Um, and
Yeah,
and
it was
honestly,
sepia
the
hell.
yeah.
It was definitely sepia toned hell. It was not a Rome that I would like to visit. When in fact Rome under Caracalla would have been pretty spectacular and extremely colorful. So making it seem like Lucius was there to save us, I just I didn't fully buy into it, but the lack of color was signaling to us that we needed a hero.
Mhm. Not that our hero knows what he's on about or what his goal is, right? Lucius has this big speech at the end after the final confrontation, and I think I said this, like, it's a giant nothing. Like, I have no idea what he intends to change or how the government is going to change or whatever. Again, like the first film had some concept of where it wanted to go. It was silly, but it existed. This film does not.
I felt like Paul Mescal, who I like as an actor, really existed only to say, "No, I won't." I
Hmm.
mean, that was, you had constantly Denzel saying, "You will be my instrument. I will use you. I will do this." Well, nah, nah. I just here to fight. I'm angry,
Yeah.
and then he delivered those lines well. But again, this I don't know that we ever fleshed out this heroic arc, this hero's journey of it just never it starts in the wrong place. It never quite develops. I don't know. It's a mess. Um,
What I wanted to see, and I know people won't agree with this, but I wanted to see Lucius get killed by an arrow, and then Acacius and Lucilla become the new dynastic pair. Like,
Mm.
what if we had
ooh,
just, when he uses his troops at Ostia, right? All the troops are at Ostia just waiting for
Yeah.
him to direct them forward, as we're told. What if Lucius just dies, and this is the motivator then we have for Acacius and for Lucilla to go forward and start a new dynasty, and to bring back or to bring back the republic as they want to. I'm not sure, but I believe in their plans more than
Yeah.
Lucius's plans, because they've at least spelled it out to us what they want in this coup that they've been planning with the troops at Ostia. But Lucius doesn't seem to be able to lead people very well, if we can take that from the opening scene. And he doesn't seem to be a very good general. He's a good fighter, but that doesn't mean you're a good leader. And
Right.
so I would rather him die and then have Pedro Pascal and Connie lead us forward into movie number 3. That's what
Or
I would have liked.
alternately, I feel like you could have gone the tragic route, and this is my off the wall take, the Chronicles of Riddick ending. He wins, he takes over the empire, and then you have this moment of Lucius being like, oh crap, I have no idea what to do next. Slam cut to
mhm.
credits.
Yeah,
Right? I
like
think that would have
sits on the
been,
throne.
and in a weird
We're
way,
next.
that I feel like actually sets up the vibe of the crisis pretty well. That the man of violence has seized power and is like, oh shoot, what do I do now? I have not planned for the next step. Like moments before being assassinated by the next guy. Like would have set up like the ending, but instead we get this like Lucius has never thought about it, but now at the end he's going to give a big speech and we're going to play We Are Free at like max volume. This movie leans so hard on the soundtrack of the first film and it did nothing for me.
Well, again, I feel like that was, and Sarah and I were talking about this. I felt like the big problem with this film is it never feels comfortable in its own skin, and you see this because the very first shot you see in the opening credits is from Gladiator, and then the last thing you see is Maximus's hands on the wheat.
Yep.
This film doesn't want to be Gladiator 2. It wants to be Gladiator. And it keeps telling us that it's Gladiator, and it's not. So here's my final question.
So maybe this is a resuscitation, but also if we could recast this as a zombie movie, right? This is the zombie of Gladiator 1. Okay?
Yeah.
And it's come back, and it kind of looks like Gladiator 1, but it's like any other zombie. It's not really all there. It hasn't
shambling a little.
It's got some drool.
So yes, this is a horror retelling of Gladiator 1. I think that's what we're gonna find out.
Bret, final thoughts?
I don't think I can top that. No, that's I think that gets the crown of victory there.
All right. All right. Usually I ask you guys if this is a history film. I think we've decided no. That it is not. Well, this is the second movie I think we've ever had someone say no to. Sarah and Bret, should people go watch this movie?
My instinct here is to answer no. I think I don't know that it's worth the price of admission. I mean, if you are hell-bent on watching it, you should watch it in the theaters because the only thing here is spectacle, so see it on the biggest screen you can find. But no, I mean, if I had to pay for my ticket, I would not have felt like I got my, $15, $20 worth. Nah.
My final thoughts are that I'm taking my students with me for a matinee, a discounted matinee on December 1st. And I think if you can see this movie in theaters, you should. But I would say pair it with some amazing scholarly works that fill in some of the gaps, and that if you have the money to put towards this movie, then definitely go see it. But if it's something where it's financially strapping to you, then perhaps just wait for it to stream or to come on TBS 10 years from now and watch it while you have the flu. How about that?
You've called it a zombie remake and telling us to watch it like a flu. Sarah, always come back to every movie that you want to come back on this pod. Forever. You've given us the best quotes in the history of this podcast. All right, Sarah Bond, Bret Devereaux. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you for having us. Oh, I appreciate just listening to us talk about this. It's also great to see Bret and see you in May, buddy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, guys, I will wish you a happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Bye.